Hello and welcome back to another exciting edition of That Remodeling Show with your host, the ever-popular Mr. Brian Powers, the president and owner of Powers Family Construction and Remodeling in beautiful downtown Laguna Niguel, California. Brian, welcome. How are you doing today?
Well, thank you, Michael. I'm doing just great. I am hoping to have a wonderful day, and just hope I'm as happy as you.
I'm sure you will be. You know, we didn't cue the audience. Nobody clapped for you today. What's wrong with these guys?
Well, I think pretty much they wait for the applause sign, and then they're going to applaud.
Joel, fire up the applause sign for these guys. There we go. Okay.
Well, you know what? They do it on cue, so that's pretty great.
You'd think they could think for themselves, but no, they got to have the little sign so they know what to do. Well, welcome back once again. What exciting show do you have for us today in the world of remodeling tips?
Well, today I get a lot of questions on, well, how come your jobs look better than others? Or how come, some jobs just don't look as crisp and clean? And so today I wanted to talk about tips and how to ensure a quality job.
Sure. Let's do it.
Great. Typically speaking, we always kind of go back to the planning as the first stage, depending on whatever that you are able to afford within your job. But spending the time and the research to do the planning to make sure you have an overall concept, so things will coordinate room to room, colors coordinate, styles, trim, all the fit, and we call it the flow, fit, and finish is kind of like the three general areas. And some of those things are going to be this, the flow is going to be, maybe you don't have the same color cabinets or the same things, but we want to make sure that the doors and the moldings will match and they'll flow throughout the project.
Okay, so I need to understand what you mean by flow. Okay. Flow is what? Consistency?
Yeah, that's probably a good word to use. A consistency, not everything exactly duplicating, but for instance, the door trim around the doors having a relevant similarity to the moldings around the windows, if there are moldings around the windows, and or the base trim, or having that they coordinate together, that they're not totally different. So the flow, and that would also mean for cabinets, like for instance, sometimes we'll use a wood cabinet in one area and a painted cabinet in another, but having the door design, the style of the door, the router, the detail, the edging, that be consistent room to room to have a flow and a characteristic about it. Tract homes, a lot of times they'll just put the same exact cabinet in every space. That's not what I'm talking about. But having the same door design or the same moldings and trims, for the most part, some designers may have some objections to that. But as far as an average remodeling job, typically that's what we'd want to do.
Okay. So what is fit?
So fit is size and scale. Mainly, you're going to not want to have an overflow of cabinetry or cabinets that are moldings that are too big. So sometimes people are too small. People will put in a crown molding, let's say, or molding near the ceiling, and it's a lot of times it's undersized to what the scale ought to be. It ought to be at least the height of the baseboard, but let me rephrase that, because the baseboard ought to be pretty much twice the size of the door casing. So the trim around the door. We're talking about a traditional.
Okay, now my head is hurting.
Yeah, so the casing is the trim that's around the door, the moldings that are around the door.
Okay.
And the crown molding or cornice molding would be on the top of cabinets, on the top of the ceiling, against the top of the wall, against the ceiling, and then the baseboards would be the molding that it's at the floor.
Okay.
So basically, when we're talking about size and scale, is that we want to have a proper ratio. We can talk about that more in detail, but having the moldings too small or too large can take away from the look and feel of your project. Kind of, it's more important to have them relative to each other than either bigger or smaller in general. Just making sure that that's the general. So the general size would be baseboard and ceiling molding similar size, and then half that size would be the trim around the door.
So those sizes, have they remained relatively consistent over the years, or do they change periodically, maybe every 10 or 20 years? So in the new homes that are being built now, are those sizes relatively the same as a house that was built 30 years ago?
Well, one of the things that kind of answer the question is homes aren't built the same as they were 20 and 30 years ago. The ceiling heights are generally taller. A lot of times the door openings are larger. So the size and scale are different than they were even than 50 years ago. Okay. But so that's why I think that they really need to go together. But the trend is for them to be larger. So the trend is a larger baseboard, but then again, a less detail. So more flat or more less ornate is more popular today than in years past. And that would go for all the moldings. And a lot of times crown molding is foregone altogether for a lot of the design choices today, just from the fact that it may or may not be good for the flow. We want to have the attention on other aspects in the house.
Okay. What about finish? What's that?
So finish, it really has to do with, is something a color? Is something have the hue and the color together, the sheen of it, and the finish, and of course the quality. I mean, the quality of any kind of finish is going to be paramount to having a job, not just an average job, but a quality looking job. So for instance, on your doors and moldings and things like that, you can have a lacquer finish, or you can have an acrylic lacquer finish, or you can have like a hand painted acrylic paint job, which is brush and roller. And there's nothing wrong with any of those things, but certainly a sprayed type finish on the doors or cabinetry, more of a lacquer type finish is going to give you a higher quality finish, a smoother look, and a more regal look. But typically it's going to be what's most pleasing, and I guess what the trends are today would be to have a lower sheen. People always say, oh, we'll paint the ceilings gloss and the moldings glossy and paint the walls with flat. It's fine, because that's what we did when we were kids, or that's what grandma and grandpa did in their home and when they were building it, or those types of things. Today, that's not so much the case. Matte flat is probably one of the flattest finishes, and it is a designer friendly because it really holds true to the color of the paint with the least amount of reflection. So whenever you have any type of enamel paint, it's going to have a little bit of a gloss to it, which is a resilience. It's an acrylic nature, which means it's scrubbable or cleanable, but it will reflect light, and that does alter the colors slightly, depending on who the person is that's doing it. Some designers are real critical and know that there's a big difference for what they're going for, with the look that they're going for, with that sheen of paint. The other thing about the sheen of paint is that the lower the sheen, the lower amount of imperfection you will notice. If you've ever noticed something that's a high sheen, let's call it a high gloss. So let's look at a typical automobile.
Yeah.
Okay, or a piano.
Oh, yeah.
And that high depth of gloss, and you really see into the finish of the paint. And it's appropriate for some things. Sometimes for cabinetry, having that deep high gloss finish. But also, if there's any kind of imperfection, the gloss is going to amplify it, just like it amplifies that deep, smooth finish. So in general speaking, having walls with a lower sheen and then ceilings with a matte flat finish. Ceilings tend to show drywall imperfections, could be framing imperfections. It could be a lot of different things going on with the flatness of a ceiling when light is coming in from the outside. Typically, you're going to see across the ceiling, and you're going to see anything from nail indentations where the drywall wasn't patched properly, or tape joints, or even texture imperfections. So the lower the gloss, the better on those things, just for the typical average product. That's going to give you a better outcome. And it is more of the current standard, I would say, that having a lower eggshell finishes, satin finishes, are just more popular.
So let's talk about ceilings for a second. in the olden days, and there may be some folks listening who have this in their house. I mean, since this is a remodeling show, it's important that we talk about real world scenarios.
Sure.
So I remember in the olden days, like where I grew up in my parents' house, and I still see these in homes today, and I don't know what the correct terminology would be, but I believe we just called them cottage cheese ceilings. Do you remember those?
Yes. Yes.
So it's like, I remember my mom said to my dad one time, all right, these things have got to go.
Yeah.
So I was visiting a friend the other day, and they had these cottage cheese ceilings, and maybe there are some of you guys out there listening who may have a cottage cheese ceiling, and you're wondering, how the heck do I get rid of this thing? Is it possible? What should somebody do in a situation like that if they want to remodel their home and replace that cottage cheese ceiling to something more upscale and updated?
I don't know. There's just something about the way that you say cottage cheese when you're talking about ceiling. It's just unappetizing. But the true terminology is acoustic texture. So it's an acoustic texture. And
Really?
Actually, a little side note.
Oh, it's horrible.
A little side note is that, quite frankly, back when it first came out, I want to say I wasn't born yet, but it was I would say in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Someone could correct me. But it came out as a enhancement.
Really?
And people paid extra in their homes, or it was an improvement, an upgrade to have the acoustic ceilings, because homes tended to be echoey and such like that. But when you put the acoustic on there, when it's not painted over, it has a tendency to absorb some of the sound and things like that. So it was actually sold as an upgrade for people. So sometimes in the older folks, they say, well, why? I paid extra for that, 50 years ago, But the reality is that, once it's been painted, the acoustic values go away quite a bit, as well as, yes, you can remove it.
How do we get rid of that thing?
Yeah, well, it basically has to be scraped off or covered over. One of the things you do want to watch out for is that when you talk about, the acoustic ceilings, pre-1976, I'm going to use that exact date lightly, so mid-70s, it used to contain asbestos. So we all know the asbestos theory, which is basically, it becomes this biohazard, or whatever you want to call it, a hazardous material. So, you may want to get it tested and go through the process of doing it, properly. But once it's been identified, let's say it's not asbestos, and you want to remove it, typically warm water, and a Hudson sprayer. Obviously, you're protecting everything well, removing flooring, furniture, and everything out of there. And then a blade, which would be something like a drywall blade or some kind of scraper that would gently, scrape off. It's very important to be gentle with it, because you can gouge the ceiling quite a bit. And it can be quite laborious if it's the first time and you've got all these gouges. Then you got to repair all the gouges, and then you got to smooth it out. Oh, and by the way, for just to note that you can pretty much plan on retaping all the joints, because in the effort of putting on this acoustic, they have to do less preparation to get the acoustic to look good than they would have if they had done it the traditional, look like the walls way,
right,
which basically was a money saver for the builder, sold as an upgrade, and it's just kind of one of those.
It's a profit deal.
Yeah, there's that in there too. So basically, now that you're coming back to doing remodeling and you want to update it, we have in many cases where it was asbestos and it was going to be too much of a project. Some of it is actually cementous and based. So with the asbestos in it, and it's very difficult to get off the surface. So in those cases, we literally use like a 1/4 inch or 3/8 drywall and actually hang drywall over it. So as long as it's encapsulated and it's no longer airborne or possibly to be airborne, then you've contained it, and that's pretty much another way of addressing asbestos, if it is asbestos. A way to do that.
So if it's not asbestos, would you rate this a project that is, number one, do it yourself, or number two, get some tools, or 3 or 4, bring a friend or hire a pro to do this. And I understand it's going to be somewhat laborious. It seem to be pretty tedious, depending on how big that little scraper thing is. You're going to end up like Michelangelo in the Sistine Chapel, scraping all that stuff off.
Because there's kind of so many pieces to it, meaning when I say so many pieces, it's, how much of an area are you doing? Are you doing a vaulted room area? Are you doing just a bedroom? Are you doing a closet? So kind of like, how much space are you doing? So then to say, should you do it yourself or should you hire somebody? Frankly, anybody that's worked over their head on anything, putting in a light bulb, putting up a cabinet, working over your head is not a normal human trait, I would say. So it's quite fatiguing. So you get tired quickly. You're getting stuff in your eyes and your face, even though you got to cover it. You're getting that stuff everywhere. It sticks to everything when it does come off. Then you end up gouging the ceiling, and then you got to do it all over again after you clean up your mess. Then you got to reprotect everything and smooth out the ceiling, and then it's going to require some kind of texturing, something to make up for the imperfections in the ceiling that are there. And either you need to be a high-end plaster job, which is a lot of coats and smoothing out professionals doing that, or smoothing it out mostly and then using a machine to texture. This is more common in homes built after 70.
Yeah, well, that sounds pretty horrible. So
it's typically, I would say, it's probably worth it to hire somebody to do that part. Even if you end up doing the painting, hire somebody to do that kind of work because of its type. Now, if it's one room or something like that, and you're going to practice, you could try it, and definitely try one room or the hallway before you go out, doing it. Planning the whole project yourself.
Yeah, I think for me, I would just Google cottage cheese ceiling repair guy and get them out here to do it. There's no way I'm going to tackle that project.
Yeah, because the ceiling is really important because, like we talked about in previous episodes, is that the light coming across the ceiling can show so much imperfection, and it really can be distracting. We want the ceiling to be not distracting. We want it just to be part of the backdrop of whatever else that you're looking at. And that kind of going into that, I mean, having kind of like what's the most important trade, on a job, it's like, obviously you've got to have good quality building and all that, and everything square and plumb and true. But I would say that, it's really important to have a good carpenter, good carpentry work, but even more so than that is a good painter. Mm-hmm. And the reason I say it like that is because even if the carpenter makes some mistakes or some things that, a good painter can properly prep and fix and mask, an average carpenter's work, if that is, is something that, a way to say that, because ultimately the things that you're going to find, or, what makes a quality job is, for instance, some people remove the acoustic ceiling and retexture the ceiling, but fail to caulk the gap between the ceiling and the wall. And the reason that you caulk the gap to the ceiling and wall is that it looks unfinished and like an open crack once the texturing's been redone. So it looks like a seamless transition between the ceiling and the wall. Also, it gives you a smooth surface. So if you do have two colors, and you're painting the ceiling white and the wall your favorite color, it gives you a smooth area, whether you're going to tape it off or whether you're going to freehand it and paint a straight line on a smooth surface. It's very difficult to get a straight line on a textured surface. And so that's one of the biggest, I think, things is having straight lines when you're painting, having a good quality preparation, holes filled, properly primed, and that quite a bit of good painter preparation is going to go a long way, because that's going to really be ultimately what people are going to see. And I have all kinds of tips, and we can talk about painting on another day. But caulking walls to ceilings, cabinets to the wall, caulking the little gap, the little and all trim, filling all the holes, making sure that everything's filled in. The preparation and that paint finish are probably going to be the top priority, I would say.
Sounds good. I have my own rating system going on here. I know yours are rated, 1, 2, 3, 4, do it yourself to call a pro. I'm rating the removal of the cottage cheese ceiling. I'm rating that DCAG for definitely call a guy.
That's it is true. It's just a lot of work, and a lot of times it's not as expensive as you might think. The guys that are set up doing that are quite professional and have teams and droves of guys that come in. Excuse me, and they're going to do a better job. And if you haven't done it several times, they're going to do a better job than you do.
Sounds good. Any other hot tips you got for us today?
No, I just wanted to make sure that your projects go swell and you get a quality job. I mean, because overlooked details are really the bane of most remodeling jobs, and we'd like to make sure your remodeling job turns out great.
Sounds good. Brian, thanks for joining us today. I hope you guys have enjoyed this new edition of That Remodeling Show with your host, Brian Powers of Powers Family Construction in Laguna Niguel, California. Brian, once again, where can someone find you online if they have some questions or want to give you a call?
Well, Powers Family Construction, all spelled out, powersfamilyconstruction.com. And in the Orange County area of Southern California, 949-488-3207. Give us a call.
Cool. Brian, thanks a lot. You guys, let's give Brian a quick round. He did a good job today, and we'll take the music out. See you guys later.